We live in 2024, the era of generative AI, self-driving cars, and rapid technological progress. Yet, one issue that has persisted for centuries and remains deeply rooted even today is racism. It's not confined to a single country or race. Despite moving toward a more interconnected, globalized world, biases based on appearance, whether it's the color of your skin or the shape of your eyes, continue to thrive. In this video, we'll look at 10 countries where racism is a huge problem, and if the color of your skin is darker than what's considered acceptable in these places, you might face significant discrimination. Let's have a look at the systemic racism in each country, how it manifests in everyday life, and the struggles faced by those who endure it. Point 10. Switzerland. Switzerland might be famous for its stunning landscapes, luxury watches, and world-class chocolate, but there's a darker side that tourists of color, especially black people, should be aware of. Some regions in Switzerland are known for higher levels of racism than others, but the truth is that the issue is more widespread than many think. Despite what the media often portrays, racism in Switzerland is an ongoing problem, and it's getting worse. Recent reports show that anti-black racism has been on the rise. 327 of the 876 cases of reported racism were against black individuals. These incidents happen in public spaces, schools, and even workplaces. One of the key areas where this discrimination shows up is racial profiling by the police, which the European Court of Human Rights even condemned Switzerland for. So while the breathtaking Alps and rich culture may be tempting, it's always better to be aware of the potential challenges and prepare accordingly. Point 9. India. India is often seen as a diverse and culturally rich country, but beneath the surface, for black people living in India, racism can show up in more subtle yet pervasive ways. Some black people have reported being denied entry into certain establishments solely because of their skin color. They've also spoken about facing derogatory terms like Habshi, a deeply offensive racial slur used against black people. They're constantly looked at like they don't belong. People stare, make jokes, or even laugh out loud, as if they're some kind of joke or outsider. The racism isn't just in looks or words. In recent years, there has also been a rise in hate crimes targeting Africans in India. One reason racism against black people in India has been normalized is the media's portrayal of black individuals. In Bollywood, black characters are often depicted in negative roles, reinforcing harmful stereotypes. Even celebrities have contributed to this narrative. Bollywood actress Isha Gupta faced backlash after sharing a racist joke about Arsenal footballer Alex Iwobi, calling him a gorilla. Though she later apologized, incidents like these show how deeply ingrained these attitudes are. Despite all these challenges, some Africans in India are trying to create positive change. But progress has been slow, and the change isn't happening fast enough for many. Point 8. Colombia. Colombia is a country widely recognized for its vibrant culture, coffee, and natural beauty, but despite its cultural diversity, discrimination against Afro-Colombians is still a significant problem, even with the historic presence of Francia Marquez, an Afro-Colombian woman, as the country's vice president. Racism persists, particularly in the media and institutions. Many Afro-Colombian leaders find themselves at constant risk, largely because the state offers insufficient protection against discrimination and violence. The situation has even caught international attention. In May 2024, UN experts highlighted the need for Colombia to address systemic racism and improve the conditions of its Afro-descendant population. The violence against Afro-Colombians is deeply tied to the exploitation of their lands and resources. Paramilitary groups and organized crime cartels often target Afro-descendant women in particular. To destabilize and control these communities, Afro-Colombians remain some of the most affected by Colombia's conflicts, often trapped in race sacrifice zones where violence, poverty, and displacement are rampant. So a flight to Colombia doesn't seem like a great idea. 7. Italy. Now, as for Italy, imagine traveling to a beautiful country, only to find the police harassing you based on your skin color. In recent years, numerous black voices have bravely spoken out against the systemic racism permeating Italian society. In 2022, a letter from people in Africa addressed these concerns, highlighting that police harassment and racist violence are everyday experiences for many black residents in Italy. But it doesn't stop at violence. Black individuals often encounter discrimination, especially in the service industry. They are treated differently, not receiving the same respect or service as their white counterparts. The UN racial justice experts visited cities like Rome, Milan, and Naples to assess how race intersects with law enforcement practices, and their findings were shocking. They reported widespread racial profiling based on unfounded assumptions that black individuals are more likely to be non-citizens or criminals. And as Italy faces a severe housing crisis, it's young black migrants who struggle to find stable accommodations, so you might want to postpone that trip to Italy. 6. Morocco. Now you might be wondering, why should black people avoid Morocco? It turns out that despite its picturesque scenery, there is a troubling undercurrent of racism that exists in several parts of the country. Unfortunately, the harsh reality is that black people frequently experience racism, name-calling, belittling, and more. Some Moroccans have resorted to calling black individuals derogatory names like monkeys or even pigs. Many black Moroccans describe a society where terms like al-abda, which means slave, are still used. And yes, there are countless negative references to black individuals in the local language. Despite Morocco being a part of Africa, some citizens have distanced themselves from this identity, perpetuating a belief that whiteness equals superiority. So, as beautiful as Morocco is, if you identify as black, it's essential to be aware of the underlying racism that persists. 5. Spain. From the stunning beaches of Costa del Sol to the artistic masterpieces of Barcelona, there's no shortage of things to see and do. But for black travelers, it's essential to consider the experiences of those who visited and what they faced. Black individuals have reported experiences ranging from being denied services in shops to facing discrimination in the workplace. And it doesn't stop there. Take Brazilian football star Vinicius Jr., for example. He shared his painful encounters with racism in Spain, calling for immediate solutions. During a press conference, he was visibly emotional as he recounted the abuse he's faced on and off the pitch, stating, "Leaving Spain would mean giving the racists what they want." The Spanish football authorities' response has been criticized for being inadequate. Ultimately, while Spain offers breathtaking sights and a rich culture, it's essential to acknowledge and address the racial issues that persist. 4. Cuba. When you think about Cuba, you might picture the vibrant culture, the music, and the rich history, and you've probably heard about how Cuba promotes itself as a colorblind country, right? Well, despite the official stance, the reality is far from that. 6 decades ago, after the 1959 revolution, Cuba declared that racial inequality was a thing of the past. The government even boasts that several top officials are black. Before 1959, racism in Cuba was explicit. There were signs barring black people from certain schools, clubs, and even some buildings. While active discrimination might have been outlawed, that doesn't mean prejudice vanished. There's a term used in Cuba, buena presencia, or good presence. On the surface, it sounds harmless. But in job ads, it's code for people with lighter skin tones and straighter hair, limiting access to better-paying jobs, especially in the tourism industry, for Afro-Cubans. And then there's the issue of Afro-Cubans being disproportionately affected by economic inequalities. Despite Cuba's narrative of equality, 98% of private businesses are owned by white Cubans. Cuba is an incredible place to visit, the culture, the history, and the people, but if you're a black traveler, the idea of a colorblind Cuba might sound appealing. But the truth is, there's still a long way to go in addressing racial inequalities. 3. Russia. Start. Let's go back in time to Soviet Russia. The Soviet Union portrayed itself as a champion of anti-imperialism and equality, and even welcomed thousands of black students from Africa and African Americans, like Langston Hughes, to study and live there. On paper, the USSR stood against racism. But in reality, things were very different. Fast forward to today, and the story hasn't changed as much as we might have hoped. There are still deep issues of racism that black people face in Russia. Take the case of François Gelassi. In 2023, his murder highlighted the racial violence that exists, with reports suggesting his killer may have had ties to a white supremacist group. This isn't just an isolated incident. According to reports, racial slurs, physical assaults, and even being refused services because of the color of your skin are common experiences for black people living in Russia. But racism in Russia goes beyond just everyday discrimination. In recent years, there's been a disturbing trend of scammers targeting black people, particularly from African nations, with fake job opportunities. These individuals are lured to Russia under the promise of work or education, only to be left stranded without visas or legal means to return home. It's important to remember that Russia continues to position itself as an ally to Africa on the international stage. But inside Russia's borders, the reality is far less friendly for Africans. 2. China. Over the past few years, reports of anti-black racism in China have been on the rise, especially on the internet. Racism in China isn't new, but what's more alarming is how it's grown. Platforms like Weibo, Douyin, and Bilibili have seen an increase in offensive racial content, depicting black people in harmful stereotypes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, things took an even darker turn. Africans living in cities like Guangzhou were targeted, evicted from their homes, and even refused service in stores, all based on baseless fears that they were spreading the virus. But the racism didn't stop there. China's media has also come under fire for broadcasting blackface performances, like the Lunar New Year show in 2021, where Chinese performers donned blackface in a so-called celebration of African culture. While some racist content gets censored, Beijing has largely ignored the issue. In fact, they've blamed Western media for stirring tensions between China and Africa, rather than addressing the root problem. While China continues to rise on the world stage, it must also rise to the challenge of tackling racism, both online and offline. For now, if you're considering a trip to China, this might be something to think about. 1. Brazil. Brazil is a country known for the Amazon rainforest, the Christ the Redeemer statue, and the lively streets of Copacabana. However, the country that was the last in the Americas to abolish slavery still grapples with a legacy of racism in many ways. Over 56% of Brazil's population identifies as black or mixed race. Despite this, black Brazilians face significant challenges in every aspect of life: employment, income, education, and health. This is particularly alarming considering Brazil's history as a major exporter of slaves. Racism in Brazil even impacts people's health from the moment they're born. According to a recent report, black Brazilians face higher rates of maternal mortality, have less access to prenatal care, and are more likely to suffer from infectious diseases. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, this inequality was even more pronounced. For many black Brazilians, racism is an everyday experience. And it's not just citizens facing this, it's also affecting migrants. While Brazil is a country of immense beauty and cultural diversity, if you're thinking about visiting, it's essential to know both the good and the bad. As we wrap up, it's clear that racism knows no borders, transcending continents and cultures. The countries we've highlighted are just a snapshot of the broader issue. Racism is a global problem. Let us know in the comments below about your experience of visiting these countries. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos.